With that, Mr. Greenwood, I see you up there. Come join us, and we appreciate all the work that you've done with us on digital identity and the participation in the working group, and all of the hard work you've provided us. So welcome once again to the Select Committee, and let's kind of hear your view of what the road forward needs to be on our digital identity work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and other participants. I'm Dazza Greenwood, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some remarks on this topic. I would like to suggest first the one way forward that we left off talking about in the last session that I want to remind you of as potential next steps is less sweeping than dealing with privacy and personal data, but maybe doing a little bit more wiring of this building block of a definition of digital identity to some other sections of Wyoming law beyond the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, where it's already pretty well connected. And so just as a reminder for future work, there were 4 other areas that were under consideration, but I think we may have timed out, and I'll mention them now briefly. One of them was the Wyoming Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act. That is the law that simplifies and streamlines the dreadful process when a loved one has passed away, or when someone's passed away and you have the duty as executor or personal representative, for example, of winding down their affairs. That part of it where you need to get access to their PayPal and their bank accounts and their LinkedIn to let people know they're not coming to the meeting, and just all of these accounts, including assets, but just life management is difficult, and it's a terrible time to have to go through that. So this act creates a more standard ramp for that process for fiduciary access to digital assets generally, and identity is at the center of that. So being able to recognize that the account holder who is deceased in particular, I'm sorry, this also applies to other fiduciaries as well that you may delegate power to, that the account holder has this kind of digital identity, this Wyoming personal digital identity. That is the identity through which they have the digital assets, and that they can delegate some authorization to their fiduciary using this definition that's now in Wyoming law, would be a perfect match for the process that they are sort of lurching toward in the Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act. There wasn't a definition of identity to point to. Now there is one of digital identity. Another one is, actually, I won't say all of them. The other big one, I think, is distinct from the Wyoming identity theft statute. It's section 6-3-902 of the Wyoming statutes, and it's unlawful impersonation through electronic means. And it provides some penalties for that. And so in it, there's just including there wasn't a definition of the personal digital identity that is being unlawfully impersonated, and that creates some criminal and other liability under that statute when it was written. Now there is one, so doing a little update to cross-reference there would also make a lot of sense. I won't get into it, but we might also look at if the work group continues this session for digital identity. The work group may also want to look at the guardianship provisions and the conservator provisions in the probate code. There may be some appropriate fixes there, and then I'll leave that right there. So that. Now, may I, Mr. Chairman, may I take another moment to make a couple of remarks, I hope clarifying on this kind of open question about the distinctions between personal digital identity and personally identifiable information or personal data.
Absolutely, Dazza, although I think Representative Westwood stepped out for one moment, so timely, but go ahead.
Okay, well, maybe somebody can mention this to the representative when he returns, but the way I look at it, the key functional difference in the definition, which partly makes this definition so good and a real model for other states, is that this is the personal digital identity that the individual can communicate or act through, which are very active words. And so I think the center use case is an account. So when we use like our Google account to communicate and to work on documents together and to calendar things, we're doing that through digital identity. This one's provided by Google, and it very arguably is not under our kind of sole dominion and control, or it's not of, by, and for us completely. It serves other interests. It is our principal authority. The principal authority for a Google account, if you read their terms and conditions, is Google, and it's our privilege to be able to use their identity system. But so by contrast, the personal digital identity is one where we have principal authority over it. So for example, if we just generate a public-private key pair in a blockchain wallet, that's a really good way to have a functional system that can act as the means to log into a system or to sign messages or communicate and act. We could use Keybase. I think the select committee is familiar with a lot of different technical solutions. The main thing is it's self-sourced identity that resolves to the individual. And I think that's the main kind of difference. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got the data about people. You mentioned location data, Mr. Chairman, or I'm sorry, Christopher Allen did, and our communications data and data that we generate and data about us. This is personal data, and I think that one of the places where it really comes up is with the CCPA, and the GDPR, and the California Consumer Privacy Act and the General Data Protection Act in Europe, and the provisions specifically that deal with what are called DSARs, or Data Subject Access Requests. So these are the rights we have under the California law and some other states now, and GDPR, and under other privacy law as well, like the Federal Privacy Act, for example. Every US person has this right for data that's held by a federal agency. This is the right to say, give me a copy of my data, or in some cases, correct my data, or in the EU and CCPA, delete my data, and under CCPA, don't sell my data. So these are rights where an individual can exercise these rights with respect to their personal data. So it's about personal data, but you need the identity to do it, because they have to know whose personal data are we talking about, and more to the point, there's real risk and liability in having the wrong person ask for these things if they're trying to be a nuisance or fraudulently get your personal data. So we need to be able to resolve to the correct endpoint, as it were, of identity, and then layer on authentication and authorization to that identity. But the rudiment here, like the basic legal building block, is the personal individual digital identity in those contexts. So those are some of distinctions and some key ways functionally that they interact, I think. So that concludes my remarks. If there's anything, I guess I'll just say, I think that this legislation that was enacted is the best digital identity legislation in the world, and as I've said on TV shows and things like that, the United States, other states should use Wyoming as a model and should enact their own. But that's up to them. I think the question for Wyoming now is, what wonderful things can people do with this legislation? And I can hardly wait to see what's possible. When there's another hackathon, somebody should email me. I'd be happy to get MIT teams involved and other people that are really into digital identity to start building out some solutions that align to this critical legal fundamental definition that you have. And I just want to congratulate the select committee on having crafted it and having it signed into law. Thank you. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. And before we get to questions for you, this year's Wyoming Hackathon, the Stampede, is the week of September 20th. So it's the 21st and 22nd are our committee meeting. The 23rd and 24th are a business and legal day, Stampede days, to get some background information. And then I believe on the 24th through the 26th is the official hackathon, if I have all of those dates correct. And it's, is it stampede.io? That's not quite right. Is it stampede.io? That's what I was missing. Wyostampede.io is where you'll find the updated information. So we will look forward to seeing you there, Dazza, as well as obviously in the time in between. And with that, welcome back, Representative. Dazza just answered your question in fine detail. Representative Yen, back to Mr. Greenwood, perhaps.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Greenwood, so I was taking a look when you mentioned the specific rights that the CCPA kind of secures for a person's personal privacy. And I'm wondering, because one of the easier things for us to do would be do something that falls under the CCPA already. Do you think it would make sense for Wyoming to have similar rights outlined for the kind of rights that they outline in the CCPA?
Go ahead, Mr. Greenwood.
Yes, thank you, Representative Yin, for the question. Personally, I do, however, and I just hasten to add, I shouldn't even take this off. I'm speaking in my personal capacity, not on behalf of MIT or anybody else. I think that California is a bit regulatory, and it seems not in the right style for Wyoming, and a little more regulatory than is my taste or what I would recommend myself. So what I think might be appropriate would be something shorter, but nonetheless getting to the fundamental rights of people should have the right to have a copy of data about them. I mean, that's a basic fair information practice. And to correct it, at least, do not sell is getting really into certain types of economics and political ideas about surveillance capitalism, which may be correct, but I think require a lot more conversation and consensus building, perhaps. But the main one, in my view, if we look at the fundamentals of the economy going forward, is data. Our personal data is definitely an asset class, and now you've got a terrific digital asset statute that would cover personal data as well. And the owner of big troughs of personal data are the people that the data is from or that it's about. In many cases, of course, other people also have ownership interests in some of that data. But what about the person? How do we, but being able to get a copy of our data, put it into a data store, have it available to analyze, to maybe do economic things with, but just to know it, to have it, to use it, to be aware of it, has tremendous value. It's going to be one of the underpinnings of the next economy. And right now we need a law to ensure that people can exercise their rights to have a copy of it. And that arising from the digital identity legislation, I think makes sense. The only other thing I would add to that is there's a part in the CCPA that I've been dealing with a lot lately, and I believe I can say sort of publicly, on behalf of Consumer Reports, I've been working with them on a new protocol. It's called the DRIP protocol, Data Rights Interface Protocol, and it basically provides a standard, a messaging standard to make it simple to for consumers to exercise their rights. Right now, the processes are really different from site to site and company to company. So this is just creating like a button or the equivalent of that you can click to get a copy of your data or other things like that. One of the issues under the California law has been how to identify and then authenticate individuals. And the authentication's happening now again and again and again in all sorts of different ways with different companies. If there is a way to do a little better than that, now that you have a personal digital identity statute, to provide sort of a simplified, streamlined way that people could identify themselves and verify their identity when they're exercising these rights with reference back to the definition of their identity, I think that would make it much less burdensome for companies to comply with and much more usable for people to exercise their rights. So my short answer is yes, it's a good idea to do that, but maybe do it a little bit simpler than California.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. Follow up, Representative? No, good. Now, let's go to Dazza for a little more discussion on the principal authority. And that concept was actually the idea of Professor Claire Sullivan, who's a member of the Digital Identity Working Group. And I think she's probably sound asleep right now, I would hope, in Australia, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll have Dazza pinch hit on that. But Dazza, also wrap up a little bit if you have any last thoughts and try and get us about a 2-minute closing from you if you can. Thanks, Dazza.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brendan. Very briefly, the phrase principal authority within the definition of personal digital identity, and also, by the way, in the parallel definition for organizational digital identity, is carrying a fair amount of weight. And the function that phrase serves within the definition is to describe the relationship, if you will, between the person, the human, natural person, or the corporate person, and their digital identity, their personal digital identity, or their organizational digital identity. And here's to give you a quick, basic idea of what that relationship was. The first words we tried was control, like the personal digital identity is the identity that the person has control over. It's an intangible representation, blah, 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 they have control. We didn't like control. It raised issues of property law and had some other legal traps that we learned about. Then we tried dominion. It was like, oh, well, they have dominion over it. That had raised other legal issues, I think, with assets and things that Carla Reyes mentioned. When we tried we tried self-sovereign, because that kind of has the idea that it's yours and it comes from you, and it's like you're the king of your identity castle, I guess. But then the word sovereignty raised questions about, like, isn't that in law pretty much a state actor or a, like a king or an emperor or something? We liked aspects of it, but in terms of the actual jurisprudence, it raised like lines of case law and thinking that didn't really make a lot of sense, sovereign, especially when you get into tort immunity and stuff like that. So we ended up on this phrase, principal authority, to carry that water, to express that idea that I'm describing. And I really like it. I actually think it was one of the best outcomes of all of that hard work that the work group did. And it arises fundamentally from the area of law called agency law, that describes a principal and an agent and a third party. And the idea of principal authority is the source of the authority that a principal has when they delegate authority to an agent to operate on their behalf is principal authority, at least in Australia. In the United States, I don't remember ever having used the phrase principal authority to distinguish the authority coming from the principal, arising naturally from them, and to distinguish it from the authority that's been delegated to them from the principal that an agent uses when they're like making a contract offer on your behalf for a house or doing something for you. They have a kind of delegated authority. Principal authority like naturally arises from a person. You're like born with it. It's like free people in free markets have principal authority, and they can keep it, they can exercise it, they can not exercise it, they can delegate it. It's theirs, it's the birthright. So that's sort of the idea of what we meant by that term. And that's exactly the term we wanted when we're talking about a citizen, resident, like humans' relationship to their identity, including their digital identity online. Like if we were to vote one day, or if we were to sign a petition, even if we were signing contracts or doing things from us, to consent to be governed, this is us. And it kind of hints at ideas of natural law and the basic social compact upon which the nation was founded. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't really have a 2-minute. I think out of a sense of compassion at being Friday, my final statements are, I hope that there's a work group that continues, that we can continue to take guidance from the subcommittee, from the select committee, on how to further refine the statute if you feel that it should be refined. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, there will definitely be a working group, and you'll definitely be on it, Dazza. So thank you for your service on that. Representative Western, any follow up on that? You good? Okay. Other questions for Dazza? Senator.
I have a quick follow up. Thank you. Good to see you, Mr. Dazza, again. Interesting, the concept of principal authority found in Australia is indicated, and hearing your explanation of it, certainly unique. And just a question as to why you don't think that concept is in American law related to agency. We have a parent authority, an actual authority, but then it sounds totally different than principal authority. And why don't you think that we created it like Australia did?
Go ahead, Des.
I don't know. I'm actually in the middle of a research initiative right now using Westlaw, and I'm asking some of my colleagues that are law professors in Australia to see if we can get back to the roots of, like, where did this arise? When was the first usage of the phrase? I mean, now that I know the phrase exists and I've read it, it sounds like we should start using it in the United States too. It's a good way to describe the authority that comes from the principal. I don't know why we didn't have the phrase, but I'm glad we had an Australian on our subcommittee to share it with us, and perhaps we should start using it. And in fact, we have. Like, America now has the phrase in a statute that you made. So we've now introduced it into American jurisprudence, and I think it's a positive addition.
Well, we look forward to this, what I suspect is going to be an interesting journal article when you're done with that investigation. It will be. Anything else for Dazza? No. Thank you very much, Dazza. Appreciate it. Ms. Kaiser, go ahead. I see you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. And again, thank you for having me speak today. My name is Brittany Kaiser, and some of my concluding remarks would be that I would like to put on the record what a positive reception the entire community, the blockchain community and the privacy and data protection community, and you could even call the wider global digital identity community as well, has had such a positive reception to the fact that this law has passed, and that there is now a bill to reference an entire body of work that has been going on for a very long time, and so much money that has been invested into building these particular solutions. So I certainly know that there are tons of companies of all sizes, from, as I said, public companies down to startups, that see this as an incredibly positive next step for the industry and for the solutions that they're building, and for legislative and regulatory acceptance of what most of us in the industry see as inevitable technologies. I'd also want to put on the record as well that one of the most interesting use cases that I have come up with so far, and that there is tons of industry interest in using this bill for, is specifically to start digging into being able to differentiate between actions that have been taken online by you through your digital identity versus fraud that has been perpetrated in your name. I would say one of the most unfortunate afflictions for a lot of people in the blockchain industry has been impersonation, especially on social media and many different communications platforms. Most people in the industry will tell you that if this has been a problem they've experienced, that they have likely seen zero action taken by social media companies and messaging platforms when people impersonate them. So the fact that the digital identity law specifically says that an action can only be attributed to a natural person if it was that natural person that took that action through their digital identity, I really believe that we could flesh that out, and that could be used particularly to protect not just people in this instance, but for wider online fraud. So I really think that that is something that it would be interesting to develop in our ongoing sessions of digital identity, and how we might be able to add some amendments or further definitions that would allow individuals to protect their own rights and be able to take action when other people have been impersonating them online and committing fraud under their name. So again, thank you so much, everyone that has done so much work on all of this. And I'm really looking forward to not just continuing to participate in the digital identity working group, but being able to push forward now on our work on personal data in a working group. And although I wasn't able to publicly comment yesterday, I would also love to join the NFT subcommittee as well,
Right.
Where I've been doing a lot of work in that space. So thank you again for having me, and everyone enjoy your weekend.
Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I having been on the subcommittee during the last interim period, I kind of realized something today that was might be an interesting thought for us to think about, which is that there is a line that I don't think I quite appreciated before between the self-sourced identity and the third-party sourced identity. So what, and to me, that kind of begs this question that was asked earlier, which is, what can we do that will benefit Wyoming or the people of Wyoming, and what would we do that wouldn't necessarily benefit Wyoming or the people of Wyoming? And I think that if I think about this notion of a self-sourced identity, of creating something that is your own contained and created vessel of your information, and then Wyoming applies these very good privacy laws around that and protections around that. That to me could make good sense. I think about on the private sector side, trust law in Wyoming. Wyoming is held out as having the best privacy laws around trust in the US, if not in the world. But that is something that you specifically set up for yourself, for your family, and then we protect it. Where I feel like we could get a bit overreaching or prescriptive in the law is when someone else has set up a service, you voluntarily go onto that service and utilize it. And then we're sort of reaching in and saying, hey, you can only do this, you can't do that. And by the way, that costs $1 for every time. But that to me doesn't seem like the right place to go legislate, and doesn't fit with Wyoming's sort of history. So I don't know where that leads, if it's maybe a little bit ahead of the evolution of this notion of KYC or data trusts. But I sort of had a realization today that there's a line between your own creation of your data and then Wyoming doing a very good job of wrapping that with privacy laws and protections. And if someone invades that, you have the ability to go after those folks under Wyoming law. And then sort of someone else's data that's been generated by you voluntarily participating in their platform. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, there's a big difference there. Absolutely. Additional discussion on that or anything, other points? Thank you, Joel.